Hi, everybody. Andrew Champagne here alongside JD Fox for this week's edition of Champagne and JD. We're very, very excited to have this week's guest on our show. If you know anything about speed figures, you know this guy. He's one of the main guys over at Timeform US doing a lot of fantastic work on a lot of concepts that fly straight over my head. He's a guy that I have known for a very, very, very long time, a guy whose handicapping acumen I really respect, and someone I'm really looking forward to chatting with on this show. Craig Milkowski is here with us. Craig, thanks very much for stopping by, buddy.
Yeah, happy to join you guys. Always good to see you again, Andrew. I think I saw you at the Breeders' Cup a couple years ago, but other than that, it's been since back in the Saratoga days where I don't even think you were old enough to legally bet. Well, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a backstory there. We met through the PaceAdvantage.com forums, and they had a yearly get-together up at Saratoga, and my dad and I went every year. My dad, by the way, says hello. Yeah. We got a lot to talk about on this show, and the first thing that we'll do is we'll dive into a discussion of the recently completed boutique meet at Keeneland Racecourse. We'll get into a discussion of some of the other races that are going on this weekend. Big card at Monmouth Park, Grade 1 Coaching Club American Oaks coming up this Saturday at Saratoga. But, Craig, a lot of fast races going on at Keeneland. There was a race where several horses broke the track record, about half the field, actually. A lot of track records falling during this 5-day meet. We were talking about this a little bit in the pre-show meeting. From a speed figure perspective, just how big were these efforts, and what can we maybe expect from some of the horses that showed really good form at Keeneland moving forward as they go elsewhere?
I I don't put a lot of stock in the raw times. The track was obviously fast, and I think as some people pointed out to me on Twitter, and it's pretty obvious. I think it had to do with the time of year. The track was much faster than we see in the spring or in the fall at Keeneland, where they tend to get a bunch more rain. And that carried over from not just the dirt, but also on the turf. But as a speed figure guy, that's not really a huge issue unless the track's like seriously biased towards speed, or it can even be against speed. Track speed and where horses win from don't always correlate. A lot of times they do, but not always. But I think we saw some really good efforts there. Our collector was really very impressive to me. He got a 123 Timeform US speed figure on our scale, which is right up near the top of what we get for all our bluegrass stakes. But we do have to take into account that the race took place in July instead of April, so it's 3 months later than it normally would be. And given these are 3-year-olds, they should be running a little faster than they would in March. I was also very impressed with Speech. I actually have that race a little bit faster than I do our collector. She got a 124 for the effort. For people who aren't familiar with our figures, we use the Timeform scale from overseas, and we're generally these days about, I'd say, 20 points faster than a buyer speed figure. So if you're looking for a comparison, it doesn't mean every race that we're going to line up perfectly, because we certainly don't, but just as a rough guide, usually about 20 points difference.
Yeah, that's something I've certainly noticed. Down in the lower end, maybe the number's a little closer to 15, but 20, a good, solid, reliable estimate. You mentioned Art Collector. You mentioned Speech. What other horses jumped out at you from a figure standpoint this past week at Keeneland?
I like Zulu Alpha, of course. He's run really big figures the last 3 out of his 4 times. He had that one where he had a little bit of a letdown, moved a little bit early, but he got a 128 for his win on what I think was closing day on that Sunday at a mile and a half. Yep. So he was certainly good. 4 Graces, she almost ran a hole in the win. She got that same 123 that Art Collector did. Obviously, it was in a sprint at that about 7 furlong distance that they run at Keeneland, but for a 3-year-old filly this time of year, that was off the charts almost. The 3-year-old fillies are looking really strong with horses like her, Gamine, and Speech, and Swiss Skydiver, who ran second in the bluegrass. It's just looking like really good group of horses. So I think we got good crops. Every year people like to come out and judge the crops, and it's probably a little too soon, but we definitely have some talented horses out there.
This might be a tough question, but from a figure perspective, obviously we're running races at different times of the year. But you mentioned the 3-year-old crop. Do you see a difference in the maturation of some of these speed figures? Are you seeing just some horses jump up 30, 40 points on monstrous efforts at any point here based on how the calendar has fallen, or is that not really factored into what's been finalized with those speed figures coming out of some of these key stakes?
30 and 40 points would be a bit much. That would be quite an improvement, but it's not unusual even this time of year and all the way into horses' 4-year-old careers. I would say halfway through their 4-year-old year, they're still going to keep improving if they get the chance. Now, a lot of time our better horses are sent off the stud. We don't see them, but we've seen horses in the last 5 or 6 years like Gun Runner, like California Chrome, that were allowed to race into their 5-year-old season, and we saw what they can really become. And they ran some figures that were almost off our charts, hitting in the 140s. So, if you give these horses time and let them develop, they're going to keep getting faster until probably about that 5-year-old season.
Here with Craig Milkowski from Timeform US, as we've mentioned. And Craig, one of the races that really caught JD and my eye was the Shakertown at Keeneland, a turf sprint. 5 or 6 horses, we're not entirely sure of the exact number, but a good portion of the field broke the track record. We have mentioned that there's a difference at Keeneland as far as the time of year. The turf course probably playing more firm, but I'm curious as to how that race came out on a figure standpoint, because I've liked Leinster a lot for a really long time. If you watched the podcast last week, I liked him in this spot and it was very good for me. How do we think that race stacked up as opposed to some of the other turf sprints that we've seen so far this year?
It was okay. It was nothing special. He got a 119 Timeform US speed figure. So for older males, that's probably a little even below average for the top sprinters. They can tend to run in the 120s at the time. So that one was definitely a function of the course, as we saw, especially on turf. I mean, we saw it on dirt, but turf was even more so. It tends to rain quite a bit during Keeneland's meets, and I doubt they've got much of that this time of season. So I'm sure that had something to do with it. It kind of reminded me, even though it was a different distance, of at Saratoga last year, got stormy, set that track record, and everybody was raving about it and kind of got on us speed figure guys about why the speed figure wasn't really anything special. And I always say course records are mostly a function of the course than they are the horses. Of course, you got to have a talented horse to really break track records a lot of the times. But even at some major tracks, I can remember growing up in Maryland, going to Laurel and looking at the track records. And there were track records held by $10,000 claimers back then, which, were maybe okay allowance horses, certainly not stakes horses. So it is mostly the track when it comes to those things. That's why I'm more of a figure guy and don't really pay much attention at all to track records. They're fun to talk about, but historically they don't mean a whole lot.
Speaking of the Shakertown, Andrew, the one thing I'll let fans know, obviously I was big on Extravagant Kid last week on this podcast. Just please go back and watch the replay and watch that trip. Please, because it's amazing that horse actually got up for 4th.
Yeah, that was a horse that made up a lot of ground late. The wire could not have come fast enough for Leinster there. If they go 2 or 3 strides, he goes from winning to maybe being 4th or 5th. It's a fantastic race. You can probably find the replay online somewhere, I hope. At any rate, we're going to move on now to talk about some of the races on Saturday. Our first stop on this trip, Monmouth Park in New Jersey. There is a gigantic 14-race program coming up on Saturday, anchored by the Grade 1 Haskell for 3-year-olds. There's a 7-horse field in this race. Some people, though, might think it's only a 1-horse race with number 2 Authentic as the 4-5 favorite. I got to tell you, I don't quite see it that way, and we'll work our way down the line here. But, Craig, what are some of your thoughts on this race if you've had a chance to take a look?
I have. I actually made a post on Twitter that I've gotten some grief about, and I basically said, how many lengths is Dr. Post going to win by, 5 or 10? Because I really think he looks strong in this spot. I know Authentic, he's got a little better speed figures, but this just looks like a horse to me who's getting better and better. He should love the mile and an eighth, particularly around 2 turns, which he didn't get in the Belmont Stakes. He ran well at Gulfstream around 2 turns at just a mile and a 16th at a distance at and a setup that's not really conducive to closers. He was able to win that day, but it's not just Dr. Post. It's the field that's drawn in against Authentic. Now, I'm not saying Authentic is a horse who has to have the lead, but he's certainly going to be up close to it. And I just think there is a ton of speed here, and it's just a terrible setup for him. And that's why I really like Dr. Post. Now, I was hoping maybe to get 3-1. The morning line came out at 5-2. So I'll be shocked if we get 8-5. But if you consider it a two-horse race as I do, I really can't see any of the others winning. He's the horse I'm going to put most of my marbles on.
I don't know if you could tell, because a lot of people have told me I have a really good poker face. I love Dr. Post in this race. I absolutely love him. And just going through the field here, Craig, you said a lot of my points for me. We need to have you on more often because we're in complete sync on this race, and that may very well scare you half to death. But just looking at this program, number 3, Jesus' team, wants to be on the lead. Number 6, Lebda, will be close. Doesn't necessarily need the lead in order to run well, but he'll be putting some pressure on. Number 7, New York Traffic, has a lot of early speed, and Paco Lopez, one of the most aggressive riders in the country. They're going to go quick early, and that should set things up for Dr. Post and Jersey Joe Bravo, who rides this track just about as well as anybody ever has. I've got a question for you, though, because I think there's a live price that you might want to use underneath in the exotics if you're playing exactas and tries second or third. Number 4, Ancient Warrior, is a horse that I loved when breaking his maiden at Del Mar last November. Won by 4 lengths, earned a pretty big figure that day, was a legitimate prospect from the barn of Jerry Hollendorfer. Goes to the sidelines for a couple of months, comes back at Oak Lawn, fit. Not a whole heck of a lot happening there. However, last time at Churchill, I think he might be showing that he's starting to figure things out, because he was 9th early after contesting the pace in his prior starts, comes running late to be 3rd. He's by constitution and out of a mare who is a half to a horse named Conquest Lemon Raid, who was stakes placed going long. He's probably, almost certainly actually, not good enough to win this race. Would either of you be surprised if he rallied to finish 2nd or 3rd?
I can say I would. He's never been to beyond 6.5 furlongs. I actually think he's still going to be a part of the pace. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe the barn will change strategies. But watching the replay of his last, I think his position early had a lot more to do with him getting slammed pretty good at the break than it did any ingenious change in strategy by Jerry Hollendorfer to take him back. And I just think it would be asking a whole lot for a horse stretching out this much to suddenly also change styles, take away his best weapon, which has been his early speed, and come closing late in a race this long. So I would never try to talk anybody off a long shot. If you want to use them second, go for it. I have no problem with that, especially at those odds, but he's not one I'm very interested in.
We were doing so well there, man. We were doing so well with Dr. Post, and then I go off and try to back Ancient Warrior a little bit. JD, how do you see the Haskell?
I love New York Traffic here. I'm always the contrarian of the group, but I look at the progression we've seen from this horse since stretching out, and it's been a completely different horse than what we saw as a 2-year-old back at Parks and Aqueduct. And really what I'm looking for is Paco Lopez. You mentioned the aggressiveness in the gates, speed that we can get from having Paco aboard. I am a little bit concerned on some of the other speeds signed on in this field, but I look at the pattern and I look at the progression that this horse has. Now, I'm hoping with the second trip in a row for Paco, he's learned something about this horse in the lane, because the last 2 efforts, this horse has been drifting, the 3/16ths just drift. So if this horse can get a lead and keep a straight path, I think this horse can go a ways. It's just all about getting some consistency from a jockey coming up, because it's been Saez, Castellano, Bravo, and now Paco, and Paco getting up a second time. So I want to give a bit of a shot here to New York Traffic. 7-2 morning line was a little more aggressive than I thought it was going to be, but you look at a 7-horse field and to make the figure work, you kind of have to have a 7-2 choice, and this is going to be the case. But I'm really expecting probably 9-2, 5-1, somewhere around there. Fair price. Not to take anything away from the two heavy favorites in this spot, but I do think New York Traffic is progressing and getting better.
The Haskell is the main event of the Saturday card at Monmouth Park, but there are a lot of other high-class races on tap. The United Nations is one. And Craig, you mentioned you like the Monmouth Cup a little bit, and I can see why. It's a 10-horse field of older horses going 1 1/8 miles on the main track. It's a Grade 3 event. And for the level, it's drawn a couple of really nice horses. It's a good, solid handicapping puzzle. How do you see that one?
It's as you say. I mean, I think it's a fairly wide open race. But anytime on our pace projector, I see a horse like Bodie Express who's loose on the lead, I'm going to look through the PPs and see how he does when he's been in that spot. And granted, he didn't run very well in the Pegasus when he was loose on the lead. But, the Pegasus is a bit of a different animal than what we're getting here in just a Grade 3. And I really think he's got a big shot in this one. I think he ran well in the House Hope. We had him running really fast, chasing a fast pace. He was only beat 1.5 lengths. If you look at the chart from that race, all the horses in the other positions kind of came from out of the clouds. So it was definitely a won the battle, lost the war kind of deal with him. And I just think he's a really scary horse. He comes in fresh. He's definitely, in my opinion, going to be out there all by himself. So if he's anywhere near that 6-1 morning line, he's a horse I'm going to bite on.
Bodie Express is one of the horses that I would certainly use if I was doing a multi-race exotics bet kind of thing here. Monongahela may well be the favorite, and I really hope I said that right, because if you take a look at this horse's name, you can come up with about 10 different pronunciations of it. But
it's Monongahela, like the river.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, Three River.
The two-horse. I'm going to call him the two-horse. The two-horse makes sense second off the bench for Chad and Paco. Likely needed the race in the Westchester. However, everything positive that you can say about the two-horse, you can also say about the three-horse, and the three-horse will likely be 3 times the price of the two-horse. My top selection is number 3, Senior Investment, who I think hated the mud last time out in the Westchester and may have had an excuse beyond that too. He got rushed up a little bit after a poor start, had nothing left in his first start off a long break. When he's on his game, he's really good, and he's been working lights out down at Parks for trainer Scott Lake, who can get a horse ready to run just about as well as anybody on the Mid-Atlantic circuit. 10-1 on the morning line on Senior Investment. That seems a little bit big to me. I think he'll probably go off about 7-8-1. This is a horse that has been around for a long time. Won the Grade 3 Lexington as a 3-year-old at Keeneland. He had a pretty nice pick 4 for me that day, actually. But Senior Investment, I think, merits a long look at a pretty nice price in that race. A lot of different directions you can go there. JD, what direction are you going in?
I immediately, when I look at this race, very similar to Craig, I'm a Timeform player, so I see Bodie Express with the chance to have a loose lead in this race, and I want to look at who's going to get first run potential on Bodie Express, and I'm going to go with the 8 Just Whistle. I think Just Whistle, obviously, slightly disappointing effort in the Suburban, but really it was a case, I think, where Irad saw that he wasn't going to be competing for the podium and kind of took it easy in the horse towards the latter stages of that race. I do look 2 back in the slop in the Sunday Silence. Strong performance there and really has been rounding into form. The one other horse I want to mention, a horse that I was big on pretty much through the horse's 3-year-old campaign that I'm fading on here is Math Wizard. Math Wizard's not been the same horse since about September of last year. Rough efforts at Santa Anita, obviously running in the Classic and coming back in the Razorback. And then just, the last race at Gulfstream, which was just a $55,000 handicap, was nowhere to be found, beaten 3 3/4 by a lot lower level horses than what you're going to see here in the Monmouth Cup. So I am against Math Wizard, which is anti what I was saying all of last year. So some people on Twitter call me the Math Wizard guy because I was just always Math Wizard, Math Wizard, Math Wizard in those spots, but not on Saturday.
There are worse things to be known as, JD. I have been known as most of them. So we're going to go now from New Jersey up to upstate New York, and this place right back here, Saratoga Racecourse. The Saturday feature is the Grade 1 Coaching Club American Oaks. It's drawn just a field of 6. I found that pretty upsetting. However, I think this is an excellent betting race because I am against the morning line favorite. That's number 1, Tonalist Shape, who on first glance certainly seems like the classiest of this group, but makes her first start outside Florida. The old wisdom, as passed down by Harvey Pack for years and years and years and years and years, is never bet a horse as the favorite doing something it's never done before. Furthermore, I just think Tonalist Shape is better at 1 turn than at 2. Saratoga's 1.1 mile configuration, 2 turns. It's not Belmont where 1.1 mile is 1 turn. They're going 2 turns here, and I think Tonalist Shape might be a little bit out of her element, especially at that price. I've got to go against her. Craig, am I crazy?
No, I don't like Tonalist Shape at all. Even though she won her last race, she kind of rebounded from that terrible effort in the Gulfstream Park Oaks when she was 9-5 and just never interested in any part. I just didn't like how she looked that day. And when I sat down to do the speed figures, even though she looked to win pretty easily, it actually came up only a 106, where she had ran a 111 when she won the Devona Dale. And I'm just not a fan of hers. I've been wrong on her a few times. I was against her when she had her big win in the Devona Dale, and then I kind of said, okay, I give up. She's better than I thought, and then she tanked next time out. So maybe this is one of those horses I don't get a good read on, but I think she's actually probably not even the second best horse in this race. She might be the third best horse in this race. So I'm going to look in some other directions. I also don't care for Bob Baffert's horse, Crystal Ball. I think she just had a very easy maiden race last time over a track that we have as speed favoring, where she got a really clear lead against very suspect competition. So I'm kind of tossing her. I do think Bill Mott's horse, the 2-1 Paris Light, second choice on the morning line, is going to run well. It won't surprise me if she wins, but she doesn't offer much value. So I'm going to go with the Chad Brown horse, Altaf, I guess is how you say it. I really liked her maiden win, first time on dirt. She laid well off the pace, but the pace wasn't overly fast that day. It was solid, but not like a crazy pace, and she was just flying late. Got up to win by 5, got a nice figure of 108 for me. So at the 5-1 morning line, I just think she's the value play in here.
JD, what do you think about Tonalist Shape?
I love Tonalist Shape in this spot. And one of the reasons why, obviously you mentioned, Andrew, the 2 turns for the first time. I'm not worried about the surface per se. The horse for course angle here I don't think is going to apply. Yes, did run at Gulfstream Park West, so has at least ran a different track, been through a different paddock, a very empty paddock, which is very similar to what it's going to experience at Saratoga on Saturday. But the move here that I like is blinkers on. I think really what we're going to see Saffie Joseph's runner here is focus and try to get the lead here. And I think having the most talented horse getting the lead, I don't know if anybody can catch her. And that's really where I'm at with Tonalist Shape. I'm a big fan here, and it's going to be a single for me when we discuss the pick 4 later on.
Tonalist Shape may well get the lead, but I don't think she's going to have an easy time of it moving forward. There's a fair amount of speed in this 6-horse field. Paris Lights is my top selection. This is a different horse around 2 turns. She's won her last 2 starts at Churchill, first breaking the maiden, then going up against winners. I thought she looked really impressive in both of those outings. She's bred to go long. This is the route that she wants, and she doesn't need the lead in order to run well. I think she's going to be sitting in that second flight, maybe about a length or 2 off the lead, and I feel as though Paris Lights will absolutely get first run on the tiring pace setters turning for home. Craig, you mentioned Altaf. That's my second selection, and Altaf might well be the lone closer in this race, the lone true sit back, make one big run. Yes, only beat maidens last time out, but this is a Grade 1 race in name only. Let's be honest. This is not exactly the kind of coaching club American Oaks that we've seen in the past with some of the best 3-year-old fillies in the country. Much, much, much different spot. Number 2, Antoinette, also intrigues me a little bit if you subscribe to the other insert trainer here angle, because Bill Mott, who trains Paris Lights, also runs Antoinette. And Antoinette hasn't done a whole heck of a lot wrong. She's hit the board in 3 straight starts as a 3-year-old, all stakes company on dirt and turf, really cool horse, actually, that can do pretty much anything they ask her to do, is another that could stalk the pace in that first run. Not quite sure if she's good enough to run with Paris Lights, but could absolutely hit the board at a little bit of a price. 6, 3, and 2 for me in the Coaching Club American Oaks. Craig and I are both going against Tonalist Shape, and J.D. Fox is indulging in his inner chalk-eating weasel and singling Tonalist Shape in the late pick 4 at Saratoga, which we'll get to in just a moment. Craig, thank you so much for stopping by and talking some racing with us. We really appreciate it. I've respected your handicapping for a really long time. It's always fun to talk the horses with you. Give us a couple of plugs here. Where can people find you if they want to see more content from you, hear your thoughts, anything you'd like to promote? Floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Just the first thing I want to say is I hope what sunk in and back at Saratoga when you were a kid, the one thing I used to drill in your head was stop betting chalk. So hopefully that's at least carried.
Have you heard me? Have you heard me?
No, you've been good. You've come a long way. I used to have to beat you over the head with the program.
He did. Trust me, he did.
But no, you've come a long way, so I'm good to see how well you're doing. Nice to finally see JD in person, as we say. It's now I can put a face to other than that little Twitter profile we all see. As far as me on Twitter, I'm at Timeform US Figs. You have to put up with me tweeting about all kind of stuff, but I try to mostly stick to horse racing and speed figures. But I'm a sports fan. I talk about all sports, basically. I don't go down the politics road, so no worries there. And then I do a podcast with David Aragona, who you mentioned. We sometimes do a Tuesday one. We're trying to get back on our schedule. We've been off kilter a little bit with the COVID-19 stuff, but we always do a Friday one. We'll have one out tomorrow. As a matter of fact, if you want to hear all the Monmouth races in the pick 4 that ends in the Haskell, we're going to cover those in depth. And we've been trying to do that. We do sequences around the country, whichever one happens to look best and maybe offer the most value. And it works pretty well because David is a guy who looks at races from a different aspect than I do. He's more of a trip guy. He does look at figures, but he's more of a trip guy and a breeding kind of guy. So we kind of hit it off and kind of bounce off each other, and it works well. So that's where you can find us. All the stuff I said, we'll post those podcasts on Twitter as I'll post this one out there. And that's about it. Occasionally for DRF, I'll write some articles during a normal Triple Crown season, but this obviously isn't one of them, so that hasn't happened. But that's where you can find me, and I really enjoyed being here. You guys ask me anytime.
Thank you very much. And I got to tell you, Craig, a lot of bettors lost a lot of money because we had you on the show, and in our question and answer period, we didn't mention the word run up once.
Good.
Craig Milkowski, everybody, from Timeform US. He does a lot of really cool stuff. Give him a follow. He's a smart guy, a guy that contributes a lot to the game, digs in a lot of hours, one of the hardest working people that I know at what he does, and we're really happy to have him on the show. Craig, thanks again, man.
Thanks.
So much fun talking to Craig Milkowski again. As we mentioned in the interview, I have known him for a very long time. One of the good guys in this game. Always fun to reconnect with him and talk some racing. It's also always fun to take a look at a late pick 4 sequence with my buddy JD. And not just because it's a good sequence, because it is, but because we approach this in completely different ways. There is no middle ground, nothing even remotely close to middle ground. This is the difference between far right and far left on the political spectrum. There is no possible way, no conceivable way in which you can say, oh, these two just talked together about what they were going to do and da da da. No, this is absolutely a situation where we see these 4 races in enough of a different way to where when I saw JD's ticket and he saw my ticket, we both laughed really, really hard.
Yeah, and we're going to start on some similar ground in the opening leg, and then we are.
It doesn't last long.
We're going to part the Red Sea, if you will. So let's get into it. And obviously, we're starting a pick 4 sequence starting in race 8 at Saratoga. It's going to be 1 1/8 over the main track. $25,000 claimers. And Andrew, since I know you don't have a staunch opinion in this race, I think we'll go ahead and let you kick it off here.
JD, you say this all the time when I do this. I have, in fact, a very strong opinion, and my strong opinion is anybody can win. This is a field of 9. There's an old Family Guy gag in the early seasons where they do a version of the Olympics, and one of the events is a 100-meter dash for runners afraid of yellow tape. This is the horse racing equivalent of the 100-meter dash for runners afraid of yellow tape. Not a lot of ones in those running lines. A lot of horses that like running second, like running third, like waiting on horses, and I have no confidence in any of them. In the pink sheet, if you read that in Saratoga, or if you see my stuff on andrewchampagne.com, you'll see that Creative Style is my top selection. That's solely because I had to have a top selection in this race. I don't have a clue, and I am not ashamed at all to hit the all button here and root for a price. JD, you mentioned that we see this at least somewhat similarly. You're going 5 deep. Take us through your thought process here.
So I do see that there is some speed signed on, and there's several horses that could take the lead. That's about all I can tell you about this race. So I've stacked those speed horses who I feel like are the 4 Singapore Trader, the 6 Musical Heart, and the 9 Hammer and Ammer. And I've kind of put them on one side of my ticket. And my top 2 selections are going to be a little different from a pace scenario. I think Creative Style, the 3 is my top choice here. And I think it's going to be the first run horse, the horse just right off the pace. And then I really think Hoffenheim is going to be way back the 1 and can close in this situation. So I've got 3 speed horses, a tactical horse, and a horse from the heavens. Really, if your budget can afford it, I don't disagree with going with the all button here. A very tough race to start a pick 4 sequence. And this is where a lot of your value is probably going to come from for the sequence, because you'll see some singles and you'll see some opinions that we have later on in the sequence. So I'm going 1, 3, 4, 6, and 9, 5 deep in leg 1. Andrew hitting the all button of glory as we move to the 9th race, which is going to be an optional claimer. N3X going 1 mile and 1/16 on the inner turf. And the weather forecast looks okay for Saturday. It's raining right now as we record Thursday night in Saratoga Springs, New York. So we've got to keep that in mind as you make your handicapping, that you do have to have a second opinion. And there's some very strong MTOs in this race. But for the sake of this podcast and looking at the weather forecast, we think this is going to stay on turf. And we have very, very different opinions in this race, Andrew.
Do you want to start or should I?
I went ahead and put it up there for you. Go for it.
Okay. So when I looked at this race, I was looking, and Set Piece jumped off the form. This is a horse that ran in some of the biggest races in Europe last year, including the 2000 Guineas, one of the most prestigious races for 3-year-olds in Great Britain. Was 40-1 that day, so he wasn't really considered one of the elites in that race, but he's a stakes winner. He is Group 3 placed. He went off for a while, came back on June 12th at Churchill Downs, and won like a very, very good horse. Did not break all that well that day, was behind a pretty slow pace. They went a half mile in 48-4, and he was 8th, more than 7 lengths off of that pace. He came flying. They went 6 furlongs in 113. They finished in 135-2. That is the definition of a European turn of foot. Set Piece gets Joel Rosario. I think his riding style suits this horse. I think he'll be able to sit way back and come flying late. One note, if you want to go a little deeper and you want to throw in a price, I could see a scenario where number 4 Noble Indy relishes the stretch out to 2 turns. He'd been running at 1 turn for a lot of his races at Belmont. Ran in the Tiller last time out, going 1 mile and 3/8. That's just way too long for this horse. This horse is 1 mile and 1/8 type. And if you look at his race 2 back, going 2 turns at Gulfstream, he won in wire-to-wire fashion. Jose Ortiz rides for Todd Pletcher. 15-1 on the morning line doesn't seem likely. I think he'll be somewhere in the 8-1 range, but the 6 is a single for me. He looks like a layover in here. If this horse does not win, I lose. I imagine a lot of tickets lose, but if another horse wins, JD's ticket is very much alive, and I'm going to preface this with something that I'm very excited about. We're going to do a first on this show here. We're going to have props for this segment. I'm really pumped about this. This was a spur-of-the-moment thing right off the top of my little head. JD, your thoughts?
I'm going to single the 7 Digital Age. I realize that this horse has not won since May 4th, 2019.
This is a prop. You want to tell everybody what this is?
That would be a hanger.
Yes, and why do you think I'm using this?
Because this horse has a tendency to hang in the lane.
Just a little. Just a little.
I look at the class, and obviously this horse ran in some of the biggest turf races for 3-year-olds in the country at the end of last year, and ran well, was competitive, and now going in second time, going through its conditions now, not in for a tag, protected spot here, had a nice run last time out, obviously finished second by a half length. That whole prop that Andrew just mentioned at Belmont on June 20th was odds on there. But I do think that this horse is going to get the setup in this race, and I do think this horse will finally have a chance to get the proverbial load of hangers off its back. I don't know what you want to say there, Andrew, but it's Chad Brown, it's Irad. It's going to be a good trip as long as there's not congestion. This is, to me, the classiest horse in the field, and I think this is a horse that can win for fun given its talent.
Kidding aside, there's a lot of backlash with Digital Age. My entire thinking was, I had Digital Age on my ticket last time out. He's supposed to win that race. I don't care about the layoff. If you watch that race and you look at the stretch run, 3/16 from home, if you stopped that and asked a gang of neutral people, okay, who wins this race? Every one of them says Digital Age. He's supposed to win that race. I can't back him here. Kidding aside with the prop, I get why you're using the horse. It's an aggressive single. The horse will likely not be favored. I get the logic, especially because you're singling a favorite in race number 10. Now, we talked about the Coaching Club American Oaks in our interview with Craig Milkowski. It's a 6-horse field. Number 1, Tonalist Shape, is the likely favorite, 9-5 on the morning line. I'm going against Tonalist Shape in this race, as mentioned. I'm going 3 deep. 2-3-6 for me. Paris Knights just seems like a horse on the improve. We know that Paris Knights can get 2 turns. Can't sleep on Bill Mott, of course, who also trains number 2, Antoinette, a pretty classy filly that is an easy horse to root for because always tries hard regardless of the surface, dirt or turf. And I will also use the Chad Brown trainee in here, number 3 in your program, who may well be the lone true closer. If they go 46 and change to the half, I think the jockey of the 3-horse is going to be licking his chops. 2, 3, and 6 for me in race number 10, the Coaching Club American Oaks. As we have established, JD, you're singling Tonalist Shape, and look, I get it. If Tonalist Shape brings the talent that she showed in Florida up here, she likely wins. There's just a lot of ifs for me. I can't shake the feeling that she's just better at 1 turn. Maybe that doesn't matter, but at her price, I'm trying to beat the favorite.
She has to try it first. She has to try 2 turns. Now, obviously, you mentioned that in this spot, a lot of people don't like a horse trying something for the first time against a field of competitors that are talented that have tried 2 turns before. But I do think Tonalist Shape, again, mentioned earlier in the show, I think the blinkers on angle is the key to this whole thing, because I think this is a show of focus, and I think this is a show that this horse is going to go out and get the lead. And those are 2 things that I like in this race. So obviously I've gone single here, so I've got a lot of depth for what is a very tricky race 11 at Saratoga, maiden special weight for 3-year-olds and up, state bred New York horses going 6 furlongs, and we've got a lot of horses and a lot of directions you can go in this race for sure. And I'm going 6 deep, which is really 7 deep, because for the moment we have a coupled entry in the 1A Royal Kaz and Kaz's Beach. I'm anticipating obviously one of those horses likely to scratch in this spot. even though they do have different jockeys listed. So that's kind of the one telltale sign that both of them may run. But I do think we're going to probably see one and not the other here. And really, if you're looking for me to give a top pick of anybody, I mean, I think it's Midnight Whiskey, the 4. Speed and Fade last time out, off the layoff, debuted in March at Aqueduct, got back in the saddle in June at Belmont, going the same 6 furlong distance in State Bred Company again. Faded to finish 4th, but only beaten by a neck total in what was a blanket finish, and another horse in this field was actually a part of that blanket finish, which is the 9. We're going to go with Farragut. I don't know, but another key horse to keep in mind. That
however you pronounce the Admiral's name. I know he was an admiral, but I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Navy folks, please don't get on me for that. I'm sorry. I know I'm inadequate. I understand that. So, JD, go ahead.
So six deep here. So basically 5 by single by 6 means for the 50-cent base wager, I have a $15 play. The one thing I will say is we did mention if that second leg comes off the turf, we've got some MTOs in there. So very similar to last week, I will say that ticket is somewhat subject to change if that situation comes into play. Probably singling the 5, honestly, in leg 2 if it comes off the turf. But 6 deep, really 7 charges in that last one, Andrew. And I mentioned some horses that you don't have on your tickets. So you go 3 deep here, and we only share one horse.
Yes, but we share my top pick. My top selection is Top of the Mint, number 10 in your program. Came back off a very long layoff last time out in the mud at Belmont, was beaten just a length despite a wide trip. That race did set up for a closer, and I think this race might well set up for a closer as well. There's a fair amount of cheap speed in here, JD. It's a maiden special weight for New York breds. Class-wise, this hits me more as a maiden claimer. I don't see a lot of horses that can pass other horses. Top of the Mint can't. There's some back form there, and if the main track has some moisture in it, that's not going to necessarily be a problem. That race last time out was in the mud at Belmont. He debuted at Aqueduct over a sloppy track, ran 3rd that day, beaten 4 lengths by Hushin. Not a bad horse there. So number 10, Top of the Mint, my top selection, second off the layoff for a talented trainer in Mark Hennig. I'll use number 3, Quick Return, as well. This is a second-time starter that may very well scratch, is entered to run on Friday, so adjust the wagers accordingly if that horse does scratch. But a decent second, first time out, beaten 4 lengths. It was a short field, but did show something in that race, a 61 Beyer speed figure, a step forward, and Quick Return certainly has a chance to win. I think it's encouraging that Kermouche rides back. The big price, though, that I'm going to use is number 6, Me and Sap. David Donk does not have a big barn, but he pops at a price at Saratoga a couple of times every year. So if you're a Saratoga veteran, you know this name. Me and Sap is a first-time starter. The breeding doesn't jump off the page. By Bourbon Courage out of an Artie Schiller mare. I love the work pattern, though. A couple of slow works in early June at Belmont. June 20th, 4 furlongs and 49-1, 28th fastest of 79. That's pretty good. July 9th, out of the gate, 4 furlongs in 48 flat, 3rd fastest of 23 at the distance. I love the progression this horse seems to be making in the mornings. David Donk can win with first-time starters. He's 10%, so it has happened before. The ROI pretty solid at $1.91 there as well. Dylan Davis will ride, and honestly, as I've mentioned, I don't think this field is any great shakes. Me and Sap might not have to be much in order to run well in here, so I'm going to use 3, 6, and 10 in race number 11 at Saratoga, the payoff leg of the pick 4. It's a $40.50 play for a 50-cent base wager. 9 by 1 by 3 by 3. I try to keep my tickets under $40 if at all possible, so we shell out a couple extra quarters, but you know what? I think this ticket could very well pay a decent chunk of change, even with the single of the likely favorite in the second leg. We get a price home with the all leg. We beat the favorite in the third leg, and we're alive to a couple of horses that may provide some value in the 11th and final. So 2 very different approaches here. As I've mentioned, take parts of our tickets you like, throw out parts that you don't. Either way, the important thing, get involved. It's an 11-race program at one of the best tracks in the country, a track where I grew up at, a track that I want to see succeed, that had some really big handle numbers on opening day. Those came out. They actually went up in handle year on year, which is shocking considering that there are no fans allowed at Saratoga this year. It's really cool to see that. It's really cool to be a part of the Pink Sheet again. You can see in our logo, I hold the Pink Sheet for a reason. At the Pink Sheet on Twitter. It's part of the Saratogian, a daily newspaper in the Saratoga Springs area. It's where I cut my teeth. We'll always have a soft spot for that place. Always happy to help out in the summertime. So we move on to our final thoughts segment, and I've got something saved up here that, believe it or not, in stark contrast to the last couple of weeks where I've used it to go off on people, this one's actually kind of cool. JD, your final thought for the week.
My final thought is actually going to be something that I forgot to mention as an angle in the last race.
That seems on brand.
Yeah. So Rick Buckley has a first-time starter in that race that intrigues me greatly for many reasons. American Piper, Sire Big Brown, everybody knows Big Brown, Mare, Freud Mare, higher incentive. It's a very interesting pedigree. It was a $12,000 OBS purchase. Gets Irad Ortiz up. So Rick Buckley has not trained a winner, a horse in the winner's circle since 2014, and just as recently returned to training. Has trained since 1993 off and on, but only 182 career starters. And looking back at the starting purses and things that this is the biggest race that this trainer has ever ran in, and has Irad Ortiz up. I think that's a pretty cool story.
You mentioned the pedigree by Big Brown out of Freud. The reason I didn't use that horse, that just screams turf to me.
Yeah.
I see Big Brown on top. That's turf. I see Freud on the bottom. Freud's can run on anything, and he's made a mark in New York, but mostly turf. You know most of his runners for some of the things that they've done in the New York bred ranks on turf. It just seems like that horse wants to go on turf, and this seemed like a good spot to get that horse going. And you know what? It's not like that race came up very strong, so take a shot. Good luck for a trainer that hasn't saddled a whole lot of horses, goes to Saratoga, going to have a runner. Makes a little bit of sense in a wide open betting race. My final thought, a salute to Bill Heller. Bill Heller was the longtime handicapper at the Daily Gazette in Schenectady, New York. He was there for decades. He was one of the longest serving members of the Saratoga Press Corps. I served in the press box for a couple of summers. It's the best possible office you can have. At least it was when I was there. Such a great convergence of people, all of whom could have a temper, but all of whom were very passionate, very knowledgeable, very insightful about the game, and most of them had a whole heck of a lot of opportunities to tell a green kid to shut up, and they never did. I'm always grateful for that. I'm always grateful for the experience that I was able to get up there, the lessons that I was able to learn. Bill Heller, like I said, has been around a long time. He's written a couple of books. Learned on Wednesday through an article written by another good guy, Mike McAdam, that he had retired. He's in Florida. He is not working for the Gazette anymore. Actually, the handicapping duties falling on a former Saratogian colleague, Matt Donato, another guy that I've been in the trenches with. So it goes from good guy to good guy. Story about Bill Heller that I'll tell before we go off the air. We didn't interact a whole heck of a lot, but we had a really fun moment in the summer of 2012. We had a sports clerk, JD, that I'm not going to out on this podcast. I'm not going to do it. I have too much respect for the guy, and he made an honest mistake. He's not a racing guy. In an online story, he called the Haskell the Eddie Haskell Invitational. It was bad. None of us did it. None of the full-timers did it, but the Saratogian was associated with that for a while. The next day, that story is pinned up next to the men's room in the Saratoga press box. I let it stay there for a day. I let people have their fun. The next day, I go and I make a big show out of tearing it down and throwing it in the garbage. People saw it, but nobody said anything to me about it. It's just one of those things where I think everyone acknowledged, okay, I let you guys have your fun. Now it's back to business because I had nothing to do with that. A little while later in the meet, I'm in the press box and Bill Heller walks up and he says, well, how are things going at the Saratogian? I look around and I whisper, put it this way, Eddie Haskell hasn't been seen in 2 weeks. He laughed and laughed really hard. It was a really cool moment that came rushing back when I heard that his time at the Daily Gazette was done. It's always sad to see a longtime turf writer retire or, in some cases, unfortunately, be forced out by the realities of the journalism industry, because guys like that are a reminder of when the all-media title at Saratoga really meant something. There were guys that poured everything they had into trying to find that one little nugget of information that nobody else in the press box knew. And as a message to everybody out there that wants a career in horse racing, doing the sort of things that we're doing the sort of things that I've been fortunate enough to do over the course of my career, approach your work like that. Approach your work like guys like Bill Heller, guys like Nick Kling, guys like Tom Amello, guys like Russ Harris from the New York Daily News. There's a lot of guys that I could reel off that unfortunately are either retired or not with us anymore. Do your research, see what these people did, learn from them, and apply it to what you're doing. Bill Heller, if you're out there and you're watching, congratulations on a great career. Hope you're enjoying your retirement. You deserve it. See? Nice, happy, and upbeat. I know, it's a real change.
I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And finally...
No. The other shoe that dropped was the shoe that dropped on my head 10 times on Thursday. If you followed me on Twitter, you saw I had the worst opening day in the history of my career as a Saratoga public handicapper. Goose egg. 0 for 10, and in the last race, my long shot got nailed in the final strides. It was one of the horses that was going to pay out the mandatory in the Empire, not the mandatory, but pay out the single ticket jackpot in the Empire 6, and Eric Consell gave that horse a heck of a ride, was 4 lengths clear entering the stretch and just ran out of gas. So on brand there, but it's a 40-day meet. Hopefully we'll be able to pick up steam, and hopefully it gets better from here and isn't a constant version of the anvils falling on Wile E. Coyote's head. I feel like it would be sort of on brand if JD superimposed an anvil that fell on my head and there were a whole bunch of stars and funny things going on. But yeah, Thursday, long day. Hopefully Friday gets better. Hopefully Saturday gets better with all the great racing that's going on, both at Saratoga and at Monmouth, site of the Daily Gallop contest this week.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Probably not going to pay a whole lot of attention to that Monmouth card.
You know, it's a 14-race card. It's a lot. I got to tell you, it's an additional burden, and I'm going to shout at the guy named Cheese, who is running this tournament and running the scores, for picking Monmouth Park and adding so much work to my program when I'm already devoting several hours a night to doing Saratoga stuff.
And trust me, I love Monmouth. I just cannot currently bet on it. So
yeah, well, you can't bet on anything. I mean, that's the story in Arizona.
Hey, Thursday.
Woodbine, nothing else.
Thursday, every track that was on offer in North America that was not a harness track was available for wagering in the state of Arizona. Tomorrow, not so much. Saturday, especially not so much. But we had a day, and it was Thursday. And did I take advantage of it? No.
Well, that's your own fault.
Well,
I mean, just saying.
It's not for lack of trying.
No. We're going to have to teach you how to multitask, I think, JD. We're going to really need to drill home the whole walk and chew gum at the same time kind of thing. I'm not sure if you skipped that lesson, but that's where we're going with that. So,
I mean, I produce and talk on this show at the same time. I mean,
hey, you know, that's its own particular set of talents that we'll dive into at a later time. So this has been a really fun show. I'm really excited to be able to watch it back. We were really excited to have Craig Milkowski come on and join us. And a little bit of a fun preview for you guys. Gary Contessa coming on next week. One of my favorite guys to talk to in New York when he was a trainer. He has moved on to a different career in thoroughbred racing. We'll be talking to him a little bit about that. Really excited for it. But for now, for JD Fox, I'm Andrew Champagne. Thanks very much for watching Champagne and JD. If you like what we do, hit that subscribe button down below the video. Share our links. Tell your friends. And JD, would you like to do the honors?
Yes. As I always say every week on the show, go play South Korean racing. It's the new Australia. Oh, wait. No, that's not it. But go play South Korean racing. It's a fun product. It's all American bred. If you need to get a nice little appetite wetter to the product. Joe Neville's has a great piece from a couple months ago in the Pollock Report on the breeding and how it's all American bred horses in South Korea.
Okay.
And stay off the beaches.
Yeah. Try it again.
Stay off the beaches.
Better. Have a good weekend, everybody.